Okay, William Bradford. Now, you remember we have been reading about the Europeans coming to America and establishing American literature, because we're going to read some American literature. We're going to try to compare how that compares to the European literature we've read, some of the African and Asian literature we've read, try to figure out what makes American literature American. And one of the people that came over was William Bradford. In his upbringing and his devotion to God, William Bradford typified most of the first settlers of New England. The son of an English farmer, he began to read the Bible seriously at the age of 12. While still a boy, he joined with a group of Puritans for prayer and religious discussion. The act took courage, for members of Bradford's families urged against it, and Puritans in England were often, in Bradford's words, taken and clapped up in prison, or had their houses beset and watched night and day. Such hounding by authorities led many Puritans to flee to Holland. Bradford was among them. Uneasy in Holland as well, he and some other Puritans decided to come to America. Okay, so these are the people that came to the north of America, the Mayflower type of people, and they were Puritans practicing a what they thought was a pure religion, um, as it should have been established in the Bible. They didn't like what had happened to religion and the Church of England, so they were practicing what they thought was a pure religion, and then they were getting hassled by all the people in the Church of England. Bradford's life in America began tragically, and in this too he typified many of the first settlers. With about 100 other English emigrants, Bradford reached Plymouth, Massachusetts in December 1620 aboard the Mayflower, a tiny ship with a cracked beam that barely weathered the crossing. While the ship stood in Cape Cod Harbor, considering where to land, Bradford's wife fell, or jumped, overboard and drowned. Why the heck would she have jumped? Many of those who landed were no luckier. In their first fierce winter ashore in America, about half of them died. Wow. So apparently the trip across was difficult because their ship, the heavy duty beam that goes down the middle of a ship, was cracked, which would make it not stay the right shape the entire time. Um, and then half of them died that first winter. As I understand it, they landed on the out outlying part of Massachusetts on the Cape, um, and there's not a whole lot of farming and stuff out there. It's great for fishing, but it was difficult because it's exposed to the weather. If Bradford's experience was typical, it was also in two ways special. He became the governor of Plymouth, and he wrote its history. In their yearly voting, the settlers elected and re-elected him governor some 30 times. So apparently he was a good administrator. In 1630, he wrote down his recollections of the founding of Plymouth and began keeping a record of annual events in the settlement, a practice he continued until 1647. His manuscript, containing about 270 pages, was consulted by other Puritan historians, but it stayed unpublished for 200 years, during which time it somehow made its way back to England. So he made a manuscript of 270 pages of his journal writing. Bradford's work of Plymouth Plantation, published for the first time in 1856 as the History of Plymouth Plantation, is pervaded by an enduring vision of America as a nation dedicated to and sustained by God. And this is an important concept. People who came over to America on the Mayflower were very religious, and they believed that they had been given this territory, delivered to America by God. So therefore, they were supposed to take it and do with it what God wanted them to do, without, of course, any regard for who's already here. The book also relates some of the best remembered episodes in American history. It describes the Puritans' flight from England to Holland, where Fearing the corruption of their children by foreign customs, they planned their desperate second remove to America. It tells of such trials as the terrible first winter in the hideous and desolate wilderness full of wild beasts and wild men. There's another important aspect of America that finds its way into American literature, this concept that America was wild. It was free and wild. You could do whatever you wanted. You had to deal with the animals. And so, therefore, we ended up with a lot of mythical characters and real characters that were wild mountain men, like the Daniel Boones and the Davy Crockett's. The Indians themselves appear often in Bradford's history. Samoset and Squanto, who not only tell the pilgrims about the surrounding country, but also do so to the pilgrims' astonishment in English. What? So they helped them by telling them about the surrounding country in English. The bloody Pequot War, climaxed by the killing of about 600 Indian men, women, and children during the elaborate burning of their village, a fearful sight, Bradford wrote, to see them thus frying in the fire and the streams of blood quenching the same. Begun in tragedy, Bradford's life in America closed in disappointment. As his book nears the end of its story of the 25-year effort to settle Plymouth, its tone grows mournful. Having fled a corrupt Europe, the settlers themselves began to commit crimes and live immorally. Having survived the wilderness, war with the Indians, and financial exploitation by profiteers in England, many of the settlers began moving away from Plymouth. To Bradford, the place seemed like an ancient mother grown old and forsaken of her children. In his disappointment, Bradford once again proves typical. He would not be the last American writer to feel that the divinely guided nation had fallen short of its promise. So the people who came over as the Puritans on the Mayflower thought God brought them here to establish sort of a new, um, you know, um, a new nation driven by this religion and this God. And people apparently, as they started to settle, they started to go back to the same ways they were uh, they were doing back in the old life. Started committing crimes and living immorally. I guess that would depend on your definition of what's moral, but they were probably doing things that seemed not correct with their religion. All right, that's it. You guys go to the questions, see what you can do with the questions. See if you can figure out who William Bradford was. Where did the Bradfords and Puritans flee to from England? And what happened before the Mayflower landed? And what job did Bradford do in Plymouth? And what did the 270 pages of original journals become? And what did Samoset and Squanto do? And finally, what was Bradford's final disappointment? So good luck with those.